All right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to Tahseen Consulting's webinar on how to expand to the GCC and the MENA region as a Southeast Asian startup. My name is Fiona. I'm an advisor on tech policy and strategy here at Tahseen Consulting, and I'll be taking you through the first half of the webinar, while Edward will take on the second half. First, maybe let me share a bit more on why we decided to do this. So we're having this webinar because over the years, our team has picked up on the convergence between MENA and Southeast Asia. And we do see some opportunities there with similar trends emerging from both regions. We want to position ourselves at the edge of Southeast Asia and China links to the GCC, because in the long term, we do think that this is a trend that will expand. Actually, Edward and I are both based in Singapore, and I guess the fact that we were hired is testament to our firm's interest and the founders' belief in the potential of the two startup and tech ecosystems, learning and benefiting from each other. However, as Southeast Asians ourselves who are familiar with the regional business landscape, we also know that the GCC and MENA region is probably unfamiliar territory for most startups looking to expand. And we understand that it can be intimidating to make the leap from Southeast Asia to GCC. But where there is fear and uncertainty, there also lies potential and opportunity, which is why we started this webinar to demystify how startups can go about expanding to the region in the most effective way. To start off, let me give you a brief introduction of Tahseen Consulting and what we do. We were established 10 years ago in 2012, and we are a small team working on big things at the intersection of tech, policy, and development. We are specialized in unregulated, highly regulated, and gray areas when it comes to tech policy, and we are the go-to policy advisor in the region for a fresh perspective. Whether you are big tech or unicorn or homegrown startup, we have helped our clients create more than 2 million jobs and invest more than $5 billion in over 40 countries. We have significant experience developing policy briefs on the dynamic political environment in the region to keep you apprised of this risk. And we have also analyzed laws, decrees, and executive regulations to help you understand the regulatory challenges in this area. So at the very core of it, what we are interested in is helping to develop business opportunities for startups looking to enter the region. And we can help you decide what to engage on, who to engage with, and how to engage. Just some background on Edward and myself as well. For me, my interest mainly lies in disruptive tech. So it could be AI, AVs, blockchain, and so on. And how we can shape the regulatory landscape in these areas. Part of what I do is I support fintech and Web3 companies by helping them to understand the opportunities offered by regulatory competition between governments in Southeast Asia and the GCC. Edward will now tell you a bit more about what he does.
Hi, I'm Edward. So my background is basically the intersection between tech and politics, broadly speaking. My client delivery experience is in social media, gaming, including metaverse-style games, sharing economy, new mobility, travel and travel tech kind of things, sectors. I've helped Asian and global tech companies understand the local and geopolitics of the MENA region, and also the emerging opportunities presented by the global growing trade and investment relations between the GCC and the Southeast Asia regions. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Edward. So we also have Romit, who will not be speaking today, but he has recently hosted a couple of webinars where senior execs from startups, such as Cars24, Lenscard, and Cancerton, share their expansion journey to the MENA. So feel free to check those out if you want to know more about some of the panelists' insights. Here are some examples of the things that we have done to give you a better idea of how we can help. We have worked with some of the largest global tech firms, aiding them with their scale-up in the region, with securing pilots, and supporting acquisitions through developing government relations strategies. We have also facilitated engagements with investors, key regulators, and policymakers, and drafted regulations for specific emerging industries. For one, We have been supporting MENA's biggest crypto exchange on regulations and licensing, since the regulatory environment in this sector is still relatively nascent. We have helped to develop best practices and done things like lobby for their interests and supported them in establishing themselves as reliable partners for collaborative projects. Now, enough about us. Let's talk a bit more about why we think expanding to the GCC could be the right step for your business. While the growth potential is huge in Southeast Asia because of the young and tech-savvy population, along with the stability of the region with its access to massive adjacent markets, we think that there is also plenty of potential in the MENA with its large spending power and access to capital, despite some challenging geopolitics. As the policy challenges of emerging digital economies are evolving similarly, we believe that knowledge sharing in key sectors such as fintech and mobility can provide a framework for deeper collaboration. We noticed that tech companies in these regions do tend to scale very rapidly, which leaves policymakers scrambling for regulatory precedents. And with booming digital economies in competition, governments tend to engage in policy competition to attract investments from tech companies to lure them to start their HQs there. We have been seeing this a lot, especially in fintech. For instance, Singapore-based crypto platforms Bybit and Crypto.com recently announced major new Dubai offices just weeks after the creation of a Dubai crypto regulator and the establishment of a virtual asset regulation law, I think back in end February. We also see the rise of free trade areas, agreements, more of what we like to call diplomacy, increasing government support, as well as growing interest from GCC sovereign wealth and venture funds. Some of them have made investments in Southeast Asian tech startups with the view of helping them expand to the MENA. And we believe that as both regions see vibrant startup ecosystems as being key to the future, there needs to be more entrepreneurship ecosystem connectivity for startups to enter more markets, and these markets may not always be homogeneous. Now, you're probably curious, what kind of startups are coming to the region? So we took a look at some of the startups that have come to the MENA and found that at least 20 startups have made or are in the midst of a MENA expansion. And while Southeast Asia startups usually enter the GCC more than 4 years after founding, that seems to be changing as there is a trend of startups taking the leap sooner since 2018. Majority of them use Singapore as a proving ground, and almost all of them use the UAE as a stepping stone into the MENA. As you can see from the data, of the startups that have expanded, around slightly more than half, 58%, are fintech or blockchain companies, while the rest are from a mix of sectors, including hospitality, e-commerce, edtech, and so on. While only a minority have received funding from GCC and MENA investors, there is, however, a growing number of institutional investors that are investing in Southeast Asia startups as they seek to diversify their portfolio. If you do want to come to the region, you may wonder, how should you do it? Based on our experience and our findings, we have developed a 10-point list on what we think Southeast Asia startups should do in order to enter the MENA region in the most effective way. In the chart on the left, we can see that most Southeast Asia startups that come to the MENA region operate only in the UAE, roughly 79%. And what we can see here is that the UAE is usually the launchpad for startups that want to come to the region. When we had our previous webinar, some execs from Indian startups shared with us that UAE is like MENA for beginners. So coming to the 10-step agile strategy for hacking MENA entry, we have identified some of the issues that startups do face quite often when they come from Southeast Asia, and sort of outline a pathway for them to ensure that they can enter the market more easily. What we would suggest to early stage or smaller startups would be first to explore a lightweight launch in the UAE. So some of the questions here are, are you able to enter or operate in the UAE without a license or physical office? And you sort of have to know how much you're willing to commit versus the opportunities that are present in the market. And then we will advise them to identify and land anchor clients. The way to do this can be through pilots or proof of concepts to showcase your innovation and demonstrate how feasible your idea is. Moving on to the third point, the UAE government does run quite a few support programs, which we will look at in more detail later on, in which there are priority sectors that they focus on. And applying to these programs shows commitment to the market. Next, of course, it is very essential to understand the market that you're entering, to know who are your competitors, how you can co-opt them, so that you can find the right opportunities and know who you can partner. You also need to know what the entrenched interests in the region are, so that you can align yourself with relevant entities and address this to lower pushback during market entry. Coming to the next point on influencing and shaping regulations, we have experience with some startups who think that they can circumvent regulations or sort of operate in gray areas in new markets. However, we strongly believe that it is absolutely necessary to engage with regulators, policymakers, and thought leaders to show your commitment to the market and ensure success in the long term. Some startups have given us feedback about their experiences with regulators, and they say that regulators in the UAE are generally very open to communicating with businesses on their needs. So that's a good thing to work with. Next, we want to emphasize that visibility is extremely important. And to be visible, some of the best places to be are major tech and investment events in the region, such as GITEX, the Gulf Information Technology Expo, which is held in Dubai every year, or the Future Investment Initiative, which is an investment forum held by Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. Once you manage to do all these things correctly in the UAE, you can then further explore investments in the GCC region and revisit your lightweight strategy. When you do decide that your platform in the UAE is ready for growth, you can then seek to expand your offices and look to further scale into Saudi Arabia and other neighboring countries such as Egypt. Now that we have outlined our 10-step strategy that links from starting out in the UAE to eventually expanding the region, let's take a look at the lightweight launch in more detail. First of all, when we speak about the lightweight launch, we need to understand and balance the decision to enter the market versus the cost to do so. And the ultimate goal here is to test the market and get traction while minimizing your investment. We understand that it might not always be feasible for a startup to invest the kind of money that's required to set up their business in a new market, especially with all the regulatory requirements that may be needed. But we do want to let you know that there are some options available in the UAE to minimize those costs. However, first, you need to understand the kind of licensing that is required, whether a physical presence is required, and need to know the input costs, registration costs, the laws and regulations in the country, the entities that regulate these activities, and of course, your exposure to taxation, value-added tax, rules on remittances, and so on. Lastly, and very importantly, as this is becoming more of an issue recently, with more data protection laws being put in place, this is on the use of personal and financial data, on how you store it, share it, transfer it, and report it with the government. So these are just some key things to understand before you even enter the country. Next, Edward will take over and continue to share on some mistakes that we see when startups try to land anchor clients.
Yeah, hi again. So having brought many startups to meet anchor clients, we collated a few trends which are linked, but we think are still worth highlighting separately. Linked because the key challenge for startups meeting anchor clients is that the sales life cycle can be very fast, and if there isn't a second chance for first impression. So I'll just run through some here. First, startups are not prepared for messaging. Many of them, for them, what their USP is with that specific anchor client, they're not too clear about it. Some are not great at selling their product even before entering the region. This might be for various reasons. Sometimes startups have a technically brilliant product, or because they previously had an easy time with strong support from their home country startup incubators. The caricature of free money in the GCC is quite outdated, and many potential clients now really understand the value of their platform and the valuable market that they provide access to. Delays from startups end, which is a bit more universal because investors have other startups to pour their money and time into. And that's quite similar to quality of delivery. Linked to that is the fact that many anchor clients can smell attempts at fishing for business, startups that are not really committed to anything in the region. Some startups want the investment or partnership or whatever deal they want before they even commit their own pilot or proof of concept. But the asymmetry in risk taken on by the anchor clients when investing in foreign Southeast Asian startups versus these startups investing in the geographically rooted anchor clients is so wide that it doesn't really make sense for startups to expect anything by fishing or being unwilling to make a commitment first. Next slide. So let me just walk you through the typical anchor clients' questions or their asks. It kind of gives you a flavor of how fast-moving things can be in the GCC and on their clients' end. Unfortunately, speed does not necessarily mean agility. So client asks can come quite quickly, despite that not actually meaning they will be working on things straight away or changing course. Anyway, we'll just give you some questions here to give you a sense of that flavor. With the first question, startups need both speed and agility. If they ask for a proposal, we think that you should send it as soon as possible to give a fantastic impression. Within 1 day, preferably. That is ideal, I think, 1 day. Two, with agility, make sure you do not strike poor agreements. No freebies. When you put forward the commitment, they have to put forward their commitment as well. The third one is a classic case of I'm quite an important guy in the region. They will kind of say, highlighting, they have so-and-so connections. But too many times these verbal promises don't actually carry through, so it's not worth it. Especially because you as a startup have put so much time and effort and your own risk into your own product, which you probably believe in. Number four, some on the other hand really sound like they want to do things now. So some will come out with a line like saying, deliver tomorrow. Of course, deals must be reasonable and thought through, even though you might be agile and fast and able to do so. But give it 2 weeks or any reasonable time frame. Don't let their impatience make you impatient. Make sure the contract is fair and feasible. It kind of ties to the next one about how some are willing to commit quickly. So they say they want regional exclusivity, which is really good actually, especially for small startups in Southeast Asia that's getting access to a huge market. And of course, many of these guys have market knowledge way exceeding yours. But while you're humble and you acknowledge so, make sure you don't give out any free lunches. Make sure you agree to a deal that you're comfortable to be able to get their profits. Usually a strategic, sizable investment is worth it, which is what we would advise, but of course, always be careful. Next. So when we expand to the region via the UAE, there's quite a developed system in the region, ecosystem of government funding programs, which is not too different from other hubs like Singapore. At the federal level, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, there are soft landing programs like these that we have listed in the top here. At the federal, there are also regulatory sandboxes where disruptive startups can work next to regulators, ADGM, DIFC. It's quite similar to MAS in Singapore. And there are also quite a few discounted licensing programs at the bottom. This depends on which tech sector you're looking at, of course. Because the UAE is a key regional hub for fintech, there are a range of regulatory sandboxes which you can pick from to test your product and showcase market commitment. Beyond fintech, there are a wider range of tech accelerators you can choose from, and it depends on your needs and your intention in the future as you scale up. The UAE also has various free zones with discounted licensing. In terms of discounted licensing programs, there are quite a few beyond the 6 listed here, and there is almost something that will definitely meet your need. Next. So let's talk regulation. The MENA region is similar in many ways like Southeast Asia in this respect. It's got 580 million people across 22 countries, depending on how you count it, versus Southeast Asia's 680 million across 11 countries. Both regions are hugely diverse at different levels of development in different countries, and the regulatory disruptions are something we see convergence in and similarities between the two regions in that tech keeps leapfrogging regulation. With this pace of development, regulators have different approaches. Broadly speaking, there are two ends of the spectrum. On one end, we have non-existent regulations, for instance, air taxis, which are very, very nascent. On the other hand, you have e-commerce platforms, which is a mature sector where things are well regulated. New entrants come in once they meet the rules, and in theory, there are no barriers to scaling for them. Gray areas are in the middle, number 3, and could be great for you if you're the first mover in engaging with the government on draft regulations. If you're there from the start, if you are frequently at the table, just the exposure to you is a serious boost for you and your business. That said, back to what Fiona said just now, at the end of the day, the nature of this business regulation interface is that it's really founded on good faith. If you try to fly under the radar, eventually things will catch up with you. And the reward of that doing that little business under the radar is not worth the potentially high pain of new regulations, which may be developed without consultation if you, and because of that could be very unfavorable. Regulation, of course, it's one of Tahseen Consulting's key pillars of work, and we have dealt with the entire spectrum here. On this side, you can see how we've approached them. For instance, in a context where there is no barrier to scale type regulations, we encourage clients to focus on market positioning, commitment, and partnerships. And these are the other ways that Tahseen Consulting helps startups. For a start, we can help in mapping opportunities, customized on your needs, but based on a much wider daily experience. So, for instance, we can help you figure out who to speak to, be it potential opponents or partners to expand in your expansion. We can help you devise stakeholder narratives that will help you explain how your startup supports regulatory and government priorities. This goes down to the meeting level, where we can even help you. We can even come down with you to the meeting and help you adapt rapidly to the changing situations, be it in regulatory or business development. This could mean escalations or planning for escalations, which is especially important in fast-moving environments like social media, public-facing tech, and so on. And if there's an ongoing political or legislative development that will affect regulation in your sector, we can help you get up to speed and ahead of it. In short, we leverage our experience helping fast-moving tech companies in the world to nudge regulators to move faster. So that's what we also use to support all types of tech companies in between, be in the GCC, ASEAN, India, or in between. And with that, I conclude this webinar, but we'd also like to highlight that this webinar is not a one-off. We have upcoming webinars where we have panels with Southeast Asian tech companies, top execs who can talk more about their experience expanding into the MENA and vice versa. We're doing the same thing with Indian tech companies. Rumit, who didn't speak today, has been doing webinars with Indian startups sharing their experience in expanding. And I personally think it's very valuable real-life experience for potential startups. So stay tuned. Anyway, so feel free to drop us questions in the chat. If you have questions later, do feel free to drop us an email, either of our emails here. Anyone? Questions? Okay, with that, feel free to drop us any questions by email as well, and we can probably give you a lengthier reply. Thanks very much to everyone for coming and joining our presentation. Hope to see you soon. Feel free to reach out.